Welcome back to MVM. Today we have a preview for Alley Cat Games' newest game coming to Kickstarter. This one is called Tungaru, and it's from the acclaimed designer of Rococo. This is a father and son team. It is Louis and Stefan Moles.
Yeah, and to put this game into any one category would be nearly impossible, but you're going to be placing some dice, you're going to be doing some action selection, and there's going to be some hand management, sort of Concordia style.
So this takes place in the Pacific. It's a Polynesian culture in which you're going to be spreading your influence across these islands. The islands of Tungaru are now known as the Gilbert Islands. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
I did not know that either until we started to play this game. So this is actually kind of a worker placement game. By using your cards and your dice, you're going to be using them on the islands attached to your boat in order to take a very specific set of actions that is on your culture board. And there's 6 basic actions here that you're going to be able to take round after round. However, like any good midweight Euro game, there's other actions you can take with the leader that you choose for that round, as well as some of the nomads that you pull onto your board. So that culture board is going to be expanding as you go.
Yeah, and also with any good Euro, there's a bunch of different resources to collect and use for a variety of things. We've got fish, shells, coconuts, and pearls here. You're going to be collecting these in a bunch of different places, in a number of different ways, and you're going to be using them for even more.
As we always say with all of these, this is a prototype that you see in front of you. Please go to the Kickstarter page because we know there's going to be some really cool components that are going to be geared around like the boats and the monuments that you see. All right, so you're looking at right now the map of the Gilbert Islands, or Tungaru. And there are a number of different islands on here depending upon the number of players. We have a three-player game set up. So this is the 2 to 3 player side. On the reverse side, there is a 4 and 5 player side because this can be played up to 5 players. You're going to see a number of different boats on these locations. These are the player colors, but they're also going to house your dice, which are basically the actions that you're going to take. Each of these main islands, and there are 6 main islands on the 2 to 3 player side, is also going to house a nomad tile, and these are going to be randomly drawn and placed from a giant stack. Now this stack's going to get larger the more players you have, because it's going to interject more tiles into the game. Also, each of these locations is going to have places for your monuments, places for dice to go, places for resources to be converted into other ones, and also places for settlers, because you can actually go out and settle these locations.
Yeah, players are going to be utilizing these islands, like Jeremy said, in a number of different ways to trade and do all sorts of things. But there's also these migration spaces on the board. These are going to house nomad tiles that will eventually fill those island spots as well. So you can take a look there, and if you clear one of these spots, it may fill in as well. Finally, there's going to be some spaces or docks between the islands. These are going to be where you basically dock your boat or position your boat. It's also going to come into play when you're moving your settlers from island to island and a number of other ways.
All right, so let's also talk about the culture boards that each of the players are going to have. We'll talk about them more in depth when we go through the player actions. However, when you look at these player boards, you're going to notice a number of different things. At the top are the 6 possible actions that you could take. Of course, you can take more actions than what's available here. We'll explain those in order. There's places for nomad tiles to either go face up or face down. You have a place over here for any of these supplies that you can collect. You are limited by the spaces that you have open. And then over here is a culture board. All of these areas that you see discs on are actually going to house your monuments at the start. And you have to actually put them onto the board to unlock those spaces as you go through the game. All right, so the game is actually pretty simple to play. We've set up a 3-player game, and there's some setup that you have to do at the very beginning by locking down some of these locations, placing some of your boats in specific locations in reverse turn order. However, this is the basic setup. We have a nomad on each of these islands. We also have a nomad on each of the migration spaces. All the players have their boards filled up with one of each type of resource and all the different monuments on their board. Now, the game is going to start like this. The start player is going to roll 3 of their dice. You're going to notice 4 dice, but that's only going to be locked with a special character. They're going to roll their 3 dice, and whatever they roll are going to be placed on their starting boat location. Each of the other players at the table is going to mimic that roll and place them there as well.
Yeah, once all the players have the same dice on their boat, then you're going to move towards using these cards. Everyone has the same cards at the beginning of the game, and you're going to select one of these and put it face down in front of you. Once everyone's done that at the table, you're going to reveal these, and of course, as you might have guessed, they're going to fire off in sort of an initiative order.
Yeah, each of these cards is going to have a number 1 through 5 in the upper left-hand corner. Those numbers are going to designate when they're going to take place. If 2 players are tied and they use the same type of card, it's going to go in turn order at that point. So 1's going to happen before 2 and so forth. Each of these cards has a number of different things you need to consider. The first thing is this area right here that you can see, not the ones that you can't see. These are the things that are going to happen when you reveal that card and it takes place. All of them have very unique benefits, and there's reasons why you want to use one of these particular leaders over a different one. For instance, this worker here is going to give you access to that 4th die for this particular turn.
Yeah, that's the number 1 card. The number 2 card is the beggar. The beggar's a little interesting. When you play the beggar, you're going to be able to get resources from your neighbors. However, if your neighbors also played a beggar, or the chief, which we'll get to in a second, you're not going to be able to collect those. So you definitely want to play this at the right time.
The cool thing about the beggar too is that you gain 3 victory points if you give another player a resource. So there is a benefit back from that. The fisher is a pretty unique one as well. You're simply going to take one of the fish and place it on this extra storage space. She basically allows you to use a fish during that round, and there's a number of reasons why you're going to need fish in order to take these actions.
Yeah, the trader is number 4. It's going to allow you to do the trade action. Now we'll get to that in a little bit, but it lets you do it right then and there.
And the chief was the last one. Guess what the chief does? Absolutely nothing at that time. It's just going to sit out in front of you. You can use the other actions associated with the chief, but you actually don't do this until the end of the round because whoever played the chief could possibly be the first player in the next turn.
Now, all of these cards also have some other actions, 2 of which are fairly standard where you're using die to collect some resources, but another one is just as unique as the ones we just mentioned. They're just going to be things that you use throughout the gameplay.
So once all the players have used all of their leaders, you're then going to go into the action starting with that first player. And as we said, there's a number of different actions. There's 6 basic actions that are right there on your culture board. So the very first thing that you can possibly do is you're going to be able to move your boat by using any of the dice on your boat itself. Now, there's some movement restrictions on how far you can move your boat according to that die that you use, but typically you're going to want to move your boat from area to area in order to place monuments and interact with those particular islands. And by using a die there, that's how you do it.
Yeah, the next thing you can do from your player board is to harvest. Now, to harvest, you have to take a couple things into consideration, as you do with a number of these actions. Namely, your boat has to be adjacent to one of the islands from which you're going to harvest. Then, you're going to use one of the die from your boat. For instance, right here, I could use this 6 in the harvest location in order to harvest a coconut. I'm simply going to take that and add it to my player board as long as I have space.
The next action is to settle. Each of the players is going to have 3 of these settlers in front of them. These are things that you're going to want to get onto the board because they're going to possibly give you some extra actions through the course of the game. But in order to settle, again, you have to make sure that your boat is adjacent to one of the 2 locations that you're trying to settle. The second thing is you have to pay 2 fish. If you don't have 2 fish, guess what? You can't settle. Then you're allowed to place this on one of those 2 locations by simply placing it standing up in that particular location. And the die that you use for that can be any die, and it's simply going to go to that area using one of those 3 spaces on that island.
Yeah, and before we get to the next actions you can take, just like Jeremy said, that settler is going to come into play with all 3 of these because whereas you typically need your boat and a die to take an action next to an island, if you have a settler on an island, you can actually just tip that settler over and take any of the following 3 actions, the first of which is to trade. When you're trading, you're either going to flip a settler over or, again, use a boat that's adjacent to the island along with a die. Now this die doesn't have to match the harvest number, but you can just place it there. Then you're going to simply trade a resource for something else, according to this right here. So I'm trading a seashell right now for a pearl, which I would take to my player board.
One of the cool things about trading too, since I'm also connected to that island, if I decide to trade, I could do the same action, or I can simply just pick up this seashell that is laying in that location. The next action is to actually travel. This is how you get to move your settlers from one location to another. And this is incredibly important because moving the settler is going to give you actions on particular islands, and you don't want them to be in the same island for the entire game. And you can travel in one of 2 different ways, either by using a die that is connected to that settler, any kind of die that you wish to use, and simply move them from one island to another island connected by one of these bridges. The other way is to simply say, hey, I'm going to tip this guy over and let him travel, but the location he moves to, he's going to be laying down until the end of the round.
Yeah, so you can see if you use the die, you're able to move him and then potentially use him on another island that same exact round. The last thing you can do is to build. Now this is the one that brings the most flavor into the game in my opinion, because it's what revolves around all these nomads and getting them from the game board to your board. When you build, again, you have to either be adjacent with your boat and use a die or tip over one of your settlers. And then you're going to look at the nomad on the island, pay its cost, and simply take that nomad and add it to your board. Now, when you add it to your board, you can do so in a couple of different ways. You can put it in one of the empty face-up slots across the bottom of your board, or you can put it face down in this spot right here. That's kind of basically the scoring spot. It's going to be there. You'll get score at the end of the game if the tile scores, but the ones down here are going to give you potentially immediate powers or ongoing powers that you can take advantage of through the rest of the game.
Yeah, let's talk about one of those things, because we've talked about the 6 basic actions, but there's also 2 other main actions you can take. One of those is from the locations at the bottom of your board. If this nomad is on my board, I can spend a 1-3-3, place it actually on this particular tile, and do a conversion of 1 seashell for 7 points. You can only put a die on one of these locations once per turn. So if you have 4 locations or 4 nomads, you can put 4 different dice on them if you're able to have that many dice to use. The other type of things that you can do on your turn as far as actions are concerned are use your leader. Now, we've already talked about the instant action that happens when you first reveal them. There's also 2 actions on the left-hand side that are basically dice conversions into some type of resource. And again, you can place a die on here, locking up that spot, but you gain some kind of resource. Now, there's one other thing that you can do very cool with your leaders.
Yeah, as I alluded to earlier, there's another action right here. And this is going to be something that's either an action or something that you can tap to sort of have an impact on an action you're taking. For instance, the worker here, when I tap this, I'm able to harvest normally as I would, but this time I'm going to be able to take 2 times the resources that I typically would.
And remember, each of these leaders have really unique powers that are going to change how you approach each of these rounds. Now, this is going to continue turn after turn until each of the players has passed. Once that happens, you're going to go into a cleanup phase, and there's 3 things that are very important to the cleanup phase. Number 1 is that all the settlers that have been used on that round are going to stand back up. All the dice that are on the dice locations are going to come back to your pool to be able to be used on the next round. And the most important thing is the card that you played, that leader that you played that round, is actually going to be passed to the player on your left, which is really unique.
Yeah, this is an interesting aspect of this game because you could find yourself with potentially 3 of the same leader at a certain point if the players around the table have used them already. And then it's up to you as to whether you want to use those because you want to use their power or potentially strategically hold on to them.
And you're going to continue doing this until all the nomad tiles have been placed onto the board. Once that happens, you're going to end up with a number of victory points equal to however many you've scored during the course of the game. And then every single one of these nomad tiles you've collected has unique ways of scoring across the bottom, whether they're on your culture board face up or they're face down. So no matter what, these nomad tiles are going to be scored at the end of the game.
Yeah, there's set collection, there's points for the various things you've collected through the game. There's a number of different things, and it just sort of mirrors all the different things you can do in this game. There's engine building, there's all sorts of card hand management. There's a lot of things going on here.
This is called Tungaru. It's from Alley Cat Games. If you guys like Rococo and you like what they've done with that game, from the same designers, at least 2 of the 3 same designers of that one. If you have any questions about the game, make them in the comments below. Subscribe to us, follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook and everything else that we do, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.